We want to, of course, consider individuality, but also acknowledge that we don't know everything. And there are certain principles that we think are right, but they also might not be. And regardless of who says them, we want to consider our own experience, and our own experience being so important when we're evaluating whether anything is working or whether something is maybe accurate, and using that in the same way that we would, like, just as importantly as we would maybe use a textbook, right?
Welcome to the Cosmic Love Antenna Podcast. This podcast is meant to encourage you to connect within so you can share your light with the world. And now, here's your host, Harrison Ma.
Welcome, beautiful beings, beautiful, energetic, almost bioenergetic beings. Welcome to the Cosmic Love Antenna, another episode, another weekly installment of your inner exploration so you can start spreading that beautiful light out as your beautiful, loving expression. Here, the show, as always, sets the intention of pulling back the layers, restricting your health, alignment, and love with your host, Harrison, and the beautiful, powerful guest I get to dive into today. And before I jump to him, before I start getting into the topic of today's show, I want to send some love to all of the existing podcast listeners, the new listeners out there. Thank you for joining us today. I can feel your hearts and your energy. As always on this show, if you get some value out of what we're going to talk about today, and I know you will, please remember that you can share this out into the podcast universe to some friends, some family members, and some people that you care about very much. That's how you can support the show. You can also go over to Apple and Spotify, leave your perspectives, your feedback, and your reviews. And a couple of weeks ago now, I launched the Cosmic Love Antenna Facebook group. So if you're looking for more tribe, more of this beautiful content, head over to Facebook and join that tribe. But with all that foundation, I now want to introduce the powerful man I have on the show today. And I'm so excited. I was just having a chat with him before we started recording, and our energies are already aligned. The powerful being, the powerful masculine energy I have on the show today is Mr. Jay Feldman. He is a fellow health coach. He's an independent health researcher. He is a fellow podcaster, which we'll talk about that in a bit of depth here today. But he is a man that is wise beyond his years. His soul really expresses a lot of powerful knowledge and information that, just for me personally, has helped me along my journey. And I wanted to get him on the show today to help you do the same. We're going to hone in today on the bioenergetic approach and what this means for you along your path. If you've listened to this show, you know that one of the main tensions is pulling back the layers, restricting health, alignment, and love. And one of these layers is that beautiful physical layer that supports our body, our being, and our energy. And the bioenergetic approach really supports that. So we're going to get into what it is, how it supports your being through your diet, through your eating, through your moving, common myths, common misconceptions within the industry outside of the bioenergetic approach, how this is much more than a diet, much more than a way of eating. It's more of a perspective, a lifestyle, and a sort of understanding of the world, and so much more. Jay, my friend, welcome to the Cosmic Love Antenna.
Thanks for having me, Harrison, and thank you for the lovely introduction.
Oh, you deserve it. You deserve it, my friend, and so much more. It is really my honor, as I said in the introduction, which I'm going to plug here straight away, your podcast, the Energy Balance podcast, is, I want to direct people straight away to this that are tuning in. When you enjoy this chat today, definitely go check out Mr. Jay's platform, because what he's sharing with the world, with his partner, Mike Fave, really supports the being to express itself fully. So I'm excited to dive deeper into this with you today, sir. With that, I think where we'll start, my friend, is, Jay, I think we'll break down the bioenergetic approach, and how we're going to, do this today is we're going to start with the physical elements, and then we'll go deeper into the spiritual and sort of metaphysical views of it. But I think before that, I would love to hear a little bit about you, sir, because, the bioenergetic approach is a tool, and you are the love that channels through that tool. So for people that don't know your voice, haven't listened to your podcast, why is this such a big part of your world? So how did the bioenergetic way of viewing the world and the way of eating, moving, living. How did that start for you?
Yeah, so it started with what really began as just a desire to improve my fitness and in some ways physical health. And as you're kind of alluding to, has grown to be much more. But at the time I was, had my fitness goals and wanted to do the best I could in achieving those, whether it was how I was working out or how I was eating. And that built an interest and passion for health and wellness and led to a lot of experimentation with different diets and a lot of trials and tribulations along the way, and falling into various camps that I think a lot of us do when we're on that journey. So some of it was the kind of more mainstream, whole grains, low fat, some points vegetarian, on the other side to paleo and keto, and all through those kind of different diets and feeling different things along the way.
Jay, just question, did you ever, I can't remember if I've heard you speak about this, but did you ever try out carnivore, any more of the sort of maybe vegan? How far on in the sort of world did you go?
So I didn't get as extreme in the restriction or presence of animal products as veganism or carnivorism. At the time, carnivore was not really on the map. And yeah, I never went all the way to veganism, just vegetarian for a period of time. But did go to more extremes in other ways, not necessarily in terms of animal products, but in terms of carbohydrate restriction, fully on ketogenic diets, or in terms of fasting. You can get very extreme with fasting, days and weeks. I never went that far, but
and we're going to get into that. So just for people listening, and thank you for sharing, my friend. We're going to get into that because that's the piece that I think within this approach really sort of highlights a lot of the main differences between the bioenergetic view and a lot of how the diets approach intermittent fasting and things like that. So, but before that, Jay, so then so you tried all these beautiful things and realized, oh, this isn't feeling good. I'm not getting the outcomes. My body's not responding in the way that I deserve to have it respond. Where did the bioenergetic approach fall into your world?
Yeah, so this world was, for me originally, a lot of rigidity as well, a lot of pushing myself, whether it was the consistency in the gym or the rigidity with the diet and the supplements and everything. And so I was feeling that not only was I not feeling great in terms of my well-being in certain ways, but I was also feeling very, very restricted and was dealing with a lot of just physical hunger and cravings, but also just a more general feeling of restriction. And so that was one of the things that I think left me open to being ready for an alternative view, and came across this bioenergetic view and was very excited at the prospect of, at the time, being able to bring carbohydrates back in for, coming from a low carb diet. Also very excited at the idea of being able to eat more food and the idea that actually nourishes ourselves, as opposed to this idea that we need to keep fighting against our body's natural signals, right? We don't feel like going to the gym all the time, but we need to push it because that's how you get stronger. You want to eat the donut or the chips or whatever other, thing that we think of as junk food, but we just need to stay away from those and eat the things that, they don't taste that good. And, it's not our favorite thing, but we have to force it. And so this view wasn't just saying, hey, carbs are good, but it was completely shifted that perspective of this idea that we need to keep fighting against our bodies, to rather that these signals, not only are they normal, but they're intentional, and that our bodies are very intelligent. They aren't mistaken in giving us these signals, as long as we listen to them properly or learn how to listen to them. And so that was a very exciting prospect for me, and led to some completely new ways of thinking about nutrition and health. And
it's exciting.
It was also something to...
It's exciting. Sorry to cut you off, Jake. This is already flowing. It's exciting because it's normal. It's exciting because that's how your body acts, right? This is really, and I'll explain this to you on our pre-chat. This is really sort of my take on this, is with all these diets, with all these boxes that we place ourselves in, it is not just rigid. I would take it a step further here. And we're going to bounce back between, energy being described as a sort of process within the body that we're going to talk about. But then I also talk about energy through divine masculine and divine feminine. And there's a different hierarchy here. But all of these different ways of being through our nutritional lens, it's not just rigid, it's very masculine, right? It's very, I need to do this. I need to hold within this container. If I go outside of it, if I flow outside of it, allow myself to go listen to my body's innate senses, then I must be wrong. I'm not fitting into the container that the tribe is in. So I think with that, Jay, and you've already started to beautifully do it, let's lean in now. For someone that's new to the bioenergetic approach, how would you define it to someone? If someone just comes up to you, people listening on this podcast, what's the sort of simple understanding of it?
Yeah. So the real simple tagline is that we are looking at health in terms of energy being the driver of our health, and the presence of greater amounts of energy lead to greater health. And a lack of energy is what leads to the deterioration and degeneration that leads to disease processes, as well as just symptoms of not feeling as good. And that ends up applying to everything, both the food that we're putting in, how much and when, how we move, the sunlight we're exposed to, the conversations we have, and on from there. So it's a lens through which we really not only look at the human body, but look at biology as a whole. And as you were saying, when I'm referring to energy here, I'm talking about more of the physiological energy. So the energy that our cells are using to function. A lot of times we'll be talking about ATP production in the mitochondria. And there is not such a difference between that and maybe an emotional and spiritual energy. And I think there's a lot of overlap there as well. But in terms of the physiology and biology, talking about that sort of cellular biochemical energy.
Yeah, I think it's a symptom. So the divine masculine and divine feminine are the foundations. And then one of the representations of that through the physical being is the biochemical output, right? Is the biochemical. So just to maybe put that dot together for people listening, it's not two different worlds. It's an expression of one. So with that, I think what we'll do, and because I know that this show, what we're going to get into today is, I'm going to try and hit in both worlds. We're going to start in this physical world and we're going to hit on some things, and then we're going to go to the abstract spiritual. So where I want to start, I think for people, Jay, is if you're comfortable with it, share with me a typical day through the bioenergetic approach. And we'll sort of narrow the scope, because like you said, the bioenergetic approach is much more than the food piece, the diet piece, but I want to hone in on that because I think that's going to give the most value here today. And I think in the future, we could do another show on the exercise pieces and all those elements. But if you could give me just a rough overview of your day through the bioenergetic approach. And then what I'll do is I'm going to pick out some common elements that I know I've faced and that other people have faced, and we'll go from there. So does that sound good for you?
Yeah, it sounds good. I will say as a disclaimer, so I'm traveling through Latin America and in a different country every 6 months or so. And that means that my food changes dramatically, both in types and there's all sorts of variety. And so it looks different now from when I was in the States, from when I was in Costa Rica, Ecuador, and now in Mexico. And so the reason I wanted to mention that is because the principles will largely be the same, but anytime I'm sharing what I'm eating day to day, I always like to put this disclaimer that this doesn't mean that this is any of these things are the right food, and there are principles that are important, but there's a lot of right ways to do it, of course. And I'm using right in like quotations and in kind of a more facetious way where there's not just one right way to do it. So
yes, thank you for that disclaimer. And yeah, what we'll do is, just to be clear for everyone, we are all biochemically individualized, right? And that is really a big approach of the view of the bioenergetic view. So yeah, give us the rough flow, my friend, and then we'll break down some components.
Sure. So a typical day will, as far as nutrition goes, normally within the first 15 to 20 minutes of when I wake up, I'm including some form of carbohydrate. Normally it'll be orange juice. or if if I don't have any orange juice at the time, maybe it'll be some watermelon or some fruit, normally to get some liquid in and also some carbohydrate. And then normally that'll kind of lead into cooking breakfast, which recently has been an omelet with whole eggs and a bit of chicken and cheese and salsa here in Mexico, there's some pretty great salsa here.
Yum.
And
I'm jealous. Keep going.
And sometimes I'll have a little bit, maybe more fruit with that. So maybe it's a mango, or here there's rambutans, which are kind of like lychees, something along those lines. And I'll have coffee with, recently it's been goat milk in the coffee and some sugar as well. And so that'll be kind of up through breakfast. Should I continue?
Yep, keep going. What I'll do,
Okay.
I'll wait till you finish the whole thing, and then I already have some things flowing. So let's go up till bedtime, and then I'll jump in.
Perfect. So yeah, normally it's like a 1-to-1 coffee to milk. So a lot of milk in there, and it'll be 2 cups, which is basically 1 cup of coffee and 1 cup of milk, maybe 1.5 of each. And that'll normally take me until lunch, kind of similar to breakfast. So a little bit before lunch, I'll start off with some fruit. Again, mangoes or banana or dates, depending on what's available. And I might have another kind of snack along with that, maybe some cheese or some potato chips cooked in coconut or olive oil. And then I'll have a more solid lunch, which here has been tacos or quesadillas that I'm making myself with some homemade tortillas. And those aren't made by me, so we're purchasing homemade tortillas. And sometimes it'll be some form of meat, maybe chicken or beef, or they'll do here, they actually do goat meat as well, or sheep. So a lot of variety. And some sort of meat, maybe some cheese again, some salsa, some peppers, maybe some onions. And so it'll be a couple tacos or a quesadilla, generally with those same ingredients. And maybe again, fruit or juice with that as well. And normally a few hours later.
Yep. And then dinner is the mixture of things as well.
Yeah, so normally between lunch and dinner, I will have a snack. Again, normally fruit, maybe some chocolate, maybe some dried fruit, some dates. The banana chips. I found banana chips recently, which are bananas cooked in coconut oil, things like that. And then dinner will be some sort of, it might be seafood, it might be some sort of animal protein source, so fish or shrimp. It might be some sort of meat, maybe an organ meat like liver, or I'm having ground meat or short ribs, any kind of variety there, normally with potatoes or sweet potatoes, maybe some carrots or onions. And then, then I guess, sorry, I'm trying to think of a typical day.
You're good. So that I can jump in here. So thank you for sharing that, my friend. And the reason I wanted to do this, because I want to give this example to then build some things off here, because there are a few things going on here. And first of all, I want to just make this very clear to people listening. What you heard in there is a couple different components. I'm going to break these down and then we're going to go through them individually. Firstly, what you heard is there's just eating. There's no, like, if you compare that to maybe a time restricted eating or an intermittent fasting, that would be blasphemous. First of all, what you just said, all that constantly sort of beautiful eating. Secondly, there is a lot of fruit, a lot of carbs, right? Which is, again, another sort of element within a lot of the diets in the world that are there's a lot of fear against carbs. There's a lot of fructose, which I'm going to come back to. But what you didn't hear was there was no sort of artificial sugars. There was no refined hydrogenized vegetable oils. There was dairy, but there was the good dairy, not the processed, homogenized, pasteurized dairy. There was not too many grains. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there are a little bit, but not too much emphasis on the sort of refined white grains in the breads. So what I'm getting at here is what Jay outlined, another component of the bioenergetic view, from my understanding, is it's all whole food, real food based, right? And that's a very big difference when we start talking about the energy that we can take in. it's the type of the carbs rather than the carbs themselves that's causing the imbalance in the energy production. Is that a good sort of synopsis, my friend, from the view?
It's a huge, huge piece there. I think you touched on, the types of carbs matter a lot. The types of fat matters a lot as well. Yeah.
And that's the other component. Within each of the meals that you were talking about, there was a ratio between the healthy fats, healthy meats, proteins, and the healthy carbs. So that's the other piece. So let's now break this. So thank you for sharing that, my friend. And I'm very envious of your beautiful travels that you're doing within this approach. I'm going to pull out a couple of these components to speak about specifically for people. So let's talk about first the fasting piece, the lack of fasting within the bioenergetic view. I would love to hear your thoughts on, why, in your perspective, why sort of this idea of intermittent fasting, hormesis, which is the sort of healthy stress. I'm putting, people can't see it, but you can see my fingers going crazy here. And why sort of the restriction of a feeding window isn't very present within the bioenergetic view.
Yeah, so you definitely touched on it there with the hormesis, which is a perspective that I think a lot of people are unaware of, but is something that is really the underpinnings of many of the interventions that people are doing, whether they're aware of it or not. And the idea with the hormesis is we're trying to induce some stress so that our bodies become stronger. And that's largely the what's generally thought of as the reason why we'd want to fast, is that we want our bodies to be deprived of food for a little while. So they have to dig into a bit of stress. They have to produce those stress hormones. And the idea that that's going to increase the cleanup processes, that's going to extend our longevity. It's going to make us stronger because we've endured some stress. And this is, of course, something that extends in all sorts of areas, but just to keep it at the fasting, that is a perspective that I don't agree with. And I think instead, and this is kind of what I was mentioning earlier, as far as something that was such a major switch for me, is instead considering the idea that actually nourishing and supporting our bodies pretty much as much as possible is what leads to our greatest energetic capacity and our greatest function. And so there's a difference in principle there, and there's reason for it, and there's physiological mechanisms, and we can dig in as deep as you'd like, but that's really what the difference is. And so instead of relying on that stress of fasting and dipping into the cortisol production and all of that, I prefer to fuel our bodies and prevent that from happening at all. And I would say that is the best way to improve our health. And a little disclaimer here, of course, there are certain benefits of fasting that have nothing to do with stress. And that I think it's worth mentioning that is largely because it can bring some relief to a gut that is struggling. So if our gut health isn't great, if we're eating foods that we don't digest well, or we have microbial problems, bacterial overgrowths, and then we fast, that is one way that we feel better. And it's not actually stressful, but there's better ways that we can accomplish that benefit to our gut. So that's kind of another piece that's worth mentioning.
I love this, but there's so many pieces we could jump off there. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to, because I want to hit a lot of different pieces here. So I'd recommend people really check out Jay's podcast, The Energy Balance. He goes into all of these topics, individually. So just want to push you to that. But before I get to the next topic, I want to ask a question. I was listening to your show this morning, and this was a really eye-opener for me. When we fast, these mechanisms that come to play, they require energy. And if we fast and the energy production within our system is not optimized due to, for whatever reason, toxins, chemicals, outside stresses, all the things, then we could be fasting, aiming for things like autophagy and the healthy apoptosis and things like that. But if the energy balance is not there to begin with, then the fasting is not going to be optimized, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We've gotten a little confused there, I think. This idea of autophagy is that cellular kind of cleanup process.
Yeah.
And this whole idea came about that we see that in degenerative states, if we have diabetes or cardiovascular disease or neurodegenerative conditions, we don't perform autophagy as well. And so people have taken this to mean that we need to do things to increase autophagy. That's that way we can oppose that negative state. But autophagy is, The things that increase autophagy are the things that create damage and stress. And the problem in those degenerative states are not that there's not damage and stress. Of course, there's a lot there. There's way more there than we would ever want. The problem in those states, as you're saying, is there's not enough energy to undergo autophagy, to clean things up in a constructive way. And so instead of focusing on trying to create more damage and stress to create more autophagy, we actually would want to be focusing on providing that energy so it's done properly. So we've gotten it's gotten a little backwards.
So then this leads to a question here before we move on from fasting is, so is there room in the bioenergetic approach for fasting? But would you rather say, instead of doing it on a day-to-day basis, maybe it's more of a sort of sporadic, every 2 to 3 days, maybe you restrict some of that window so you can have that balance between fueling the system, optimizing the energy pathway. So then when you do decide to fast, then it's actually working to the degree it should be. Is that a good analysis of it? Would you agree with that?
It's certainly better, but it would kind of depend on what the goal is with the fasting. And if the goal is still trying to induce the stress, to induce the autophagy, I would say, A, it's not necessary, and B, I still think it comes at some extent of a cost. And we're going to be getting enough stress. Like I would kind of say, don't worry about getting enough stress. You'll get enough between just regular lifestyles and work and fights with significant others, and also our day-to-day life, right? Moving around, maybe doing some exercise. Stress is going to happen there, and we certainly don't need to be adding more on. And I don't ever think that too little stress is the problem. And so we don't need that stress to activate the autophagy. It's a process that'll go on when our metabolism is very high. For example, if we have good thyroid hormone activity, that alone is enough to activate autophagy. And we actually are able to activate those same processes in both a low energy and high energy state. It's not a situation where you have the state and then you can fast in a low energy state or fast in a high energy state and it's different. We can actually activate the process through producing a lot of energy. So what happens is there's an overlapping signal where when we're under stress, our cells say, enough, we can't keep producing energy. It's too damaging right now. We need to focus more on cleanup and fixing what's wrong. There's a very parallel thing that happens when we have a lot of energy. Our cells say, we don't need any more. So let's work on cleaning up and creating more structure and creating more mitochondria. And so it actually can trigger the same signal without inducing the stress at all.
Wow. Yeah, so that's a big one. I'm having a domino there. So the autophagy can actually occur in a state of energy surplus, in a state of consuming and eating and doing all the things. That's a big one. I love it. All right, let's shift here. Another piece I want to hit on is fruit. Is fruit. And with your example that you gave of your day, there's a lot of fruit, a lot of consumption of fruit. And I think for a lot of my vegan/vegetarian listeners, this is not new to you, but I think for a lot of my paleo, maybe carnivore, maybe keto listeners, when you hear the addition of fruit, there's a lot of red flags that go up, right? We seem to put fruit, and I know I have in the past, put fruit in the same category as refined artificial sugars and sweeteners, and we need to be very mindful of this. So let's start with this. What's your perspectives on fruit specifically within as a healthy carb with fiber, all the things, and why we shouldn't be within this lens of energy and having a beautiful day where we're connecting into the foods that we eat and listening to our body? Why is fruit such a pivotal role within the bioenergetic approach?
So I would say that fruit is in general, our best source of carbohydrates we have available. There are some other very close seconds like roots and tubers and squashes. But I would say fruit is kind of at the top there. And those other ones are great too. And this is because they provide a great source of carbohydrates. They also provide some great vitamins and minerals. They provide some polyphenols, bioflavonoids that have all sorts of benefits. Whether most of those benefits are actually in our gut, they actually really help to restore our gut health. And they, I don't know if I mentioned fiber, but they also have certain types of fibers that are particularly beneficial for our gut, have some very unique effects.
And that's a big one. That's a big one just in terms of people listening. that's going to have a totally different impact on you versus if that fiber was not present and you were taking in just an artificial source of that, right? So yeah, sorry, kick on.
Yeah. As compared to a refined source, we've got the vitamins and minerals, the polyphenols, the fibers. Those things all make a big difference. Now, for the person who is keto and is saying, yeah, maybe fruit is the best carb source, but I don't want carbs. Why would I want carbs? And that's, of course, a separate conversation. To keep it simple, what I would say is that fats are great, but as a fuel, fat is our backup energy source. If we're in a famine, if we're starving, if we're in a stress state, we resort to burning fat, and it's great to have it there, but it acts as a signal that we need to slow our metabolism down. We need to conserve energy so that way we can survive whatever stress we're undergoing. And again, it's great that we can do that to survive, but it comes at the cost of turning down the energy we're producing, going into kind of like a low battery state. It means lower activity cognitively, lower activity in terms of our reproductive function, lower digestive function. And so carbohydrates are that signal that say, hey, we actually have really great abundant food available, and turns up all those processes, turns on all those hormones. And so that's really where I would say this is why we actually could use some carbohydrates, and they're really helpful from the energy producing standpoint.
Yeah.
And
the thyroid is a big one, my friend. I know you speak a lot about this, but I'm gonna pop in my mum here, because my mum, not just me, but my mum is a big fan of the work that you do and your podcast and all the things you talk about. And she's moving through that challenge specifically, and we've both taken on this approach based off your work and some other resources. And that's one of her main reasons, is to help with that thyroid health as we age. And just for people listening out there, I've done a couple episodes on hormonal health, but there's so many other factors that are contributing to thyroid challenge. And if you can just change this perspective of the food piece and adding in this energy through fruit and through this bioenergetic view, now we're starting to support that thyroid healing. We're now starting to support that energy production storehouse that the thyroid sort of controls. I want to go back to one of the things that came up for me with fruit. I think it was probably from being paleo, or there's a lot of the fears around excess sugar, is candida, right? So I think candida is a challenge that when people start bringing in more carbs specifically, and also fruit, there's this fear that, the microbiome, which is a balance between bacteria, parasites, fungal elements, when we start bringing in too much carbs, specifically in the fruit form, there is this fear that, I'm gonna push it too much into that overflow, potential candida overgrowth. What are your thoughts on this, my friend, when fears of candida come up around fruit?
So there is some important reasoning there. And if we have an overgrowth, whether it's candida or bacterial, and it's especially really high in our intestines, and we eat carbohydrate-based foods, it will feed those things. And that will generally not make us feel great. It might lead to some bloating, some gas, it might aggravate brain fog, all sorts of other symptoms. It's a legitimate concern. And at the same time, I don't think that means that we should be avoiding carbohydrates. The first thing I would say is, in that case, we might need to adjust the types that we're having. So we might need to lean toward, well, first off, we would certainly want to lean away from the much harder to digest ones, the grains and legumes, unless they're very, very well processed. But even then, if you're dealing with this overgrowth, it can still be a bit of an issue. The raw vegetables, the nuts and seeds, which those aren't as much carbohydrates, but still have some difficulty with digestion. Those things can all especially aggravate those issues. And fruits generally are much less likely to, because the carbohydrates digested much quicker, much easier. But there are still fibers in those fruits, and the more fibrous ones could also sometimes aggravate those overgrowth. So there is a concern there. And that actually might be a situation where I might lean more toward, again, less fibrous fruits, maybe more honey, maple syrup, or juice. Yeah. And that's a way that we can take in carbohydrates and absorb the carbohydrates way before it's getting to the overgrowth. And so that is an important piece to consider. And I do think we need to adjust our fiber intake based on our gut health. When our gut is healthy, those fibers are super important and help to maintain a healthy microbiome. But when we have these overgrowths, it can aggravate symptoms. Now, a key point here that I think is really worth mentioning when it comes to candida, I guess 2 points. So one is that a fungus, and candida is a fungus, thrives at low body temperatures.
You read my mind. That's what I was going to bring up. I love it. Keep going.
Yeah, so there's some really great research showing that even just small differences, 97 degrees Fahrenheit versus 98.5 degrees Fahrenheit, which is in Celsius, we're talking like 36.5 versus 36.7.
Good job.
Just differences like that can, thanks. So those can allow for a difference in terms of candida growth, and the fungal growth, fungus is much more likely to grow when our body temperature is lower. And the main regulator of our body temperatures are thyroid activity. And as you were saying, carbs are really important for keeping that thyroid activity up. So continuing to avoid the carbs while you have a candida issue can allow it to remain for way longer. And sometimes it'll be a little bit more dormant if you're not feeding it, but it'll stay and eventually grow. And that's the other piece too, which is that when candida doesn't have enough fuel, it goes looking for it. And so there's a lot of research here where what they find is that if you deprive them excessively of glucose or carbohydrate, they'll become more filamentous. They'll grow out these filaments and start to spread. And so I'm not saying we want to be feeding tons of carbs into an overgrowth. We'll typically get some symptoms, but the idea that we just want to starve it and that's going to be the resolution doesn't play out in terms of the physiology. And I've seen that so many times that it doesn't play out in terms of how clients are actually feeling and how people are actually experiencing candida issues.
Yeah, it's big. That's another gem just for people listening. That's a big one for everyone to understand. Again, we're going back to, it's not the carbs, it's the type of the carbs here that we're really speaking about. And it's these beautiful nuances that it's what I appreciate about the bioenergetic approach in general, is that it starts to now help you see that, there's some changes here that I can make based off my choices that are nuanced, that are going to appeal to me. And what I would just add to this is two things. One is look at that gut, right? So what is the state of the gut? And when we're looking to remove carbohydrates, like you said, look at those refined artificial carbohydrates first, right? Look at those refined grains. Look at not the real whole food sugars in the fructose form, right? But the refined sugars, the artificial sugars that are causing the dysbiosis in the gut to begin with. And I think it's also worth noting when those candida elements go looking, that is also a stepping stone to a parasite infection too, right? Because we know that a parasitical infection is going to usually come after, in many ways, a candida imbalance, right? Because they're feeding off that candida overgrowth. So yeah, a lot of little rabbit holes we can go down here, but I'm going to throw one more physical element here of the bioenergetic approach. And then I want to go deeper into some spiritual lenses here with you, my friend. And the last piece I want to hit on is, I know this has been a big shift for me, taking in the bioenergetic approach, and it sort of comes into the feeding window and the fasting element we were talking about. And it's this idea of really leaving 2, 3, 4 hours of a window before we go to bed. And this is gonna help us sleep better. This is gonna help us get into deep sleep. It's gonna give our gut a rest so we can go into the restoration that we need. And I know this is not what I've found. And I know that the bioenergetic approach kind of has a different perspective on this. So can you speak to the idea of feeding before sleep and how that can support all of the things that sleep is good for?
Definitely. So it's true that having a big, heavy meal before bed typically it puts a bit of a burden on us and isn't normally comfortable. But that doesn't mean that we don't want to eat anything in those hours before bed. And the reason for that, kind of coming back to fasting, as you said, is when we're asleep, we're fasting. And we aren't, because there's no food coming in, our bodies, well, maybe not our body, but especially our brain and our organs are all very active. And honestly, other tissues are too. There's a lot of rebuilding going on. We're using a lot of energy during the night, a lot of repairs happening. And that requires energy, which requires fuel. And so if we're not taking that fuel in, it has to come from our stores. And in terms of glucose, we're storing a lot of that glucose as glycogen in our liver. Our muscles store it too, but that stays in the muscles, whereas the liver glycogen is sent out, and that is used by our brain especially, which is pretty active when we're sleeping. And so because we're not eating overnight, we're using that stored fuel. And if there's not very much stored, then that can lead to us waking up during the night and having bursts of stress. And a lot of people experience this. They'll wake up maybe 2 or 3 a.m. Sometimes they're hungry. Sometimes their heart's racing. Sometimes they just can't get back to bed. And that's normally because we've run out of fuel. And we're normally supposed to run out of fuel, but not until we've slept 8 or 9 or 10 hours, however long it is. And that's naturally supposed to wake us up. We're supposed to have a surge of stress hormones in the morning. But if that's happening too early, it's normally because we don't have enough fuel stored. There can be some other reasons too, but in order to kind of top off that fuel tank, it can actually be really helpful to have a bit of food in the evening. So mostly carb and fat based like snack is what I suggest. And we didn't get to that when we were talking about my day of eating, but I'll have my dinner and then normally a couple hours later, I will have some sort of snack. So lately we made some baked apples, and there's some really great quality ice cream here that's just milk and eggs and sugar and salt. And so I'll do some baked apples and a bit of ice cream. Sometimes it might be a bit of fruit and chocolate, something like that, but a nice combination of fat and carbs so that my fuel stores are topped off so I can sleep deeply all the way through the night. And I will say also, it normally helps with falling asleep too. If somebody's struggling to fall asleep, one huge component could be that their fuel stores aren't topped off enough, and so their body isn't able to get into that relaxed, energetic state. And I don't want to go on too much of a tangent here, but
you're good, sir.
Yeah, great. I wanted to mention that energetic, when we're looking at what's going on in terms of physiological energy at the cell, an energetic state is actually a relaxed, ready state where the cell can do what it needs to do and it has the energy available to do it. And as such, it's relaxed. Whereas a contracted state tends to be a state of low energy. And the clearest example, which is kind of a morbid one, but when we die, we go into rigor mortis, which is when every single muscle tightens and it's rock hard. And that's because there's no energy there. The energy is actually what keeps us able to move like internally and externally and flow
and allow. So let me jump in here, Jay. So this is and this is going to be a beautiful segue into more of the spiritual elements here, but this is, I hope people are getting the understanding of really not the biochemical energetic. I hope you're getting that from everything that Jay is highlighting, but now sort of seeing this divine masculine and feminine trend here. All those words that you just talked about, the rigid, the needing a space of allowing to actually have energy to flow. Right. This is the comparison here between the divine masculine and divine feminine. Right. We don't want to avoid one or the other. We want to have a balance between both. Right. We don't want to be in that masculine state all the time, because that's what, as you're alluding to here through the bioenergetic view, we get to a point where we become so rigid, so tight, so in a box and a way of being that energy actually gets to the point where it can't flow anymore. We start to have challenges. We start to have the thyroid. We start to have the gut dysbiosis, the things that we've been talking about. So these are all manifestations here. And I just want to add this in because my mum will laugh. The baked fruit piece is something that before bed, that snack, it's such a beautiful idea that I've yet to do, but she's done it. She's incorporated it into her world and she keeps telling me, you need to do this. It's amazing. So I just thought that was funny that you added that in because it's on my list of to-dos, but
it's brand new for me too. I've recommended it. I know a lot of people like it, but I just did it for just this last week or two for the first time because we had some good organic apples. So. Yeah.
And I'm just hearing how amazing it is. Let's shift here now, Jay, because I think this is, like I said, this is a beautiful segue into, okay, let's go deeper with this. So we've just highlighted some elements from the physical lens, some practical pieces that people can start experimenting with. And the theme here that I've been picking up is there's a lot of just, making sure that we're removing a lot of the harmful components, again, the refined products, the artificial products, the refined oils, adding in all these beautiful whole food elements. But then once you've done that, as you've been hearing from what Jay is saying, there's a lot of one, just flowing and listening to your body and allowing the day to move without these rigid boxes. But two, there's a lot of, again, tuning into your power and what you need. And you mentioned this in our pre-chat, and I want to bring this in now. The bioenergetic view is very anti-authoritarianism, right? It's very sort of taking our power back, right? And realizing that, yes, we do need people outside of us from time to time for support, guidance, and love and assistance. But at the end of the day, our power resides within us. And if we can start listening to that power, it's going to come out a lot more. So what's your views here, my friend, on how the bioenergetic approach sort of factors into this, collective perspective?
Yeah. So the idea of authoritarianism is essentially that we need to subscribe to authority for our views, right? So what we're told by the doctor, the teacher, the person in the authority state, the authority figure, they know what's right. We don't question it. They tell it to us and we follow. And that is something that is very, and along with that, that means we don't listen to what we're experiencing. We aren't open to alternative possibilities. We aren't thinking outside the box. And so the bioenergetic view is one that's not particularly compatible with that, and was something that really changed things for me as well. One of those other pieces that really drew me in. And the listening to our bodies was a major one, because it is in some ways impossible to do and to acknowledge how our bodies are feeling when we think that what we're doing is right and it involves us not feeling good in some way. And so it makes it very tough. You can only listen so much. And so it's much more compatible with this view where when we're hungry, instead of needing to further our fast, it's actually a signal that we're in need of fuel and energy. And there's a whole hormonal reason and a physiological, energetic reason and as well. And so there's all sorts of reasons, but tuning into that, listening to that gives us really amazing information. And within the bioenergetic viewer, as a part of it, experimentation and testing things is considered to be a really important tenet that we want to, of course, consider individuality, but also acknowledge that we don't know everything. And there are certain principles that we think are right, but they also might not be. And regardless of who says them, we want to consider our own experience, and our own experience being so important when we're evaluating whether anything is working or whether something is maybe accurate, and using that in the same way that we would, just as importantly as we would maybe use a textbook, right?
Yes.
Which is not at all what we're told so much of the time.
So thank you for elaborating, my friend. This is, if people have been listening to my show for a while now, this is now where we're sort of the physical and the anatomical, physiological responses that comes about through the things that we've been talking about today. This is now where it matches and starts to flow into our other ways of being. So what I mean by this is I did a show about a month ago now talking about the difference between thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuiting. And what Jay's talking about with the textbooks and seeing professionals and doctors and this power outside of ourselves, that often falls within the thinking world, right? We fall into a belief system, right? And within that belief system, we use the facts and the logic and the understanding to define our way of being in this world and showing up. But that is not all that we are. We aren't just thinking beings. It's a powerful part of us. And do not get me wrong. We need it. It's what helps us be the humans that we are. But that's not all that we are. Right. And our body speaks in many other ways. And what Jay is saying here with the bioenergetic approach and what we've been talking about today, when we start to listen and create the space for our body to speak in these other ways, right, through our senses, through our feelings, right? We know that, and I added in the emotional piece around eating before, often if I'm craving something, yes, energy, like we've been talking about today, but if we can go another layer deep, often there is an emotional reason, right? There's what am I not getting? What am I not listening to? What am I not expressing and feeling? if we don't have this conversation at all and we're constantly going outwards, then that's going to continue whether we like it or not, and probably come up as a chronic symptom down the road. Does that resonate, my friend?
Absolutely. And I think it's also, from my view, I think it's very much a two-way street between, even if we just look at emotions and the physiology. And in that, I think it's much easier to be open emotionally, to examine and explore your own emotional side when you have the physiological energy to be relaxed all the way on that cellular level and to invite those things in. And I see that with clients who, when in the start of their journey, it's never something that's on their table, right? They're never, most of the time, they're not coming to me with that intention. But so often it's something that comes out, just a re-examining of every aspect of their lives, because you're not stuck in a stressed, contracted, conservation type state, where that's not a time for inward thinking or even larger thinking, larger philosophical thinking, or exploring all of the oddities and possibilities, right? So yeah, I think it's very much a bi-directional relationship.
Yep. And I'm going to share this with you, my friend, because you probably haven't put this together. The name of my podcast is The Cosmic Love Antenna. And the way I use that analogy is I use it in my coaching too. We are, in my opinion, we are all cosmic love antennas. And what that means is, like an antenna system, there's two main parts, right? There's the frequency that's flowing within it, right? That's our spirit, that's our emotions, that's our sort of mental thought patterns. But then the other part of the antenna system is the structure that supports the frequency to flow, right? And like you're saying, it's bidirectional. We need both. We need to remove the traumas, the pains, the spiritual, emotional, mental challenges that stop the frequency from emitting. But then we need to be mindful of grounding back into the physiology, creating the structure, the healthy structure to support that frequency to be emitted out into the cosmos, right? So that's, I'm there with you, my friend, and I could not agree more. And just for people listening, as Jay is beautifully highlighting, it goes both ways, right? So when we support the spiritual being, the emotional being, it supports the physiology. When we support the physiology, through the things that we've been talking about today, through the gut, through the feeding, the nourishment of the activation of the energy, it supports the spiritual being, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Love it. Let's, Jay, I want to hit on one more topic here before we finish. And another sort of, and this was your idea too, and I love it, and I want to make sure this sort of adds into this chat we're having, is this idea of cooperation versus competition, right? And how the bioenergetic view really promotes, rather than seeing us as separate from the outside world and us as the individual, right? There's a separation that's apparent. It's rather a cooperation of what's going on between our internal terrain and the outside world and the choices that we're making. So do you want to maybe speak to this element of the bioenergetic view and what factors in around this?
Yeah, there's some fun routes we can go down here. Maybe the first that we'll start with, because I'd like to get back to, kind of bookmark talking about an actual more altruistic, community-oriented way of being. But even a step before that, you were kind of talking about, of course, us not being separate from our environment. And in the same way that we were talking about a two-way street between our emotions and our physiology, of course, the exact same is true between us and every aspect and every being around us. And this exists physiologically as well. And the dogma used to be that we have our genes, we have our line of genes, that these are what make us human and what make each of us an individual. And they don't change except for sometimes randomly they change. And that's it. There's no direction. There's no construction. It randomly changes. And if it happens to fit in the environment, great, that gene line lives on. And, it's kind of bleak, but it's also entirely separate from everything else. There's no relationship. The environment doesn't affect those genes. And we are completely separate from every other being that has its own genes. And there's a lot of really fascinating lines of research that suggest that is not at all the case. It's starting to become more recognized with this idea of epigenetics, which is that our genes can turn on and off based on what's going on in our environment. But it actually goes beyond that as well. There's some really interesting work showing that we are taking up the direct genetic material of everything around us, the food that we're eating, animals we come into contact with, other humans, of course, and that those things also affect our physiology. And those things all get passed down as well. And the state that we're in and the state of our environment, all of that information makes it down through future generations. Even so, just a quick example here, a very cool study where, and I might butcher it slightly, but there's pregnant rats, I believe. I don't remember if they're pregnant or not when this happens, but they're exposed to cat urine and something else to make them fearful of it. And then the offspring, actually that fear gets passed down and they then experience that same fear. And we can take that in, there's obviously some ways that things can get passed down in what we could call a negative or defensive way, but also in the opposite way too. And every aspect of our environment has such a profound impact. It creates a beautiful picture.
I love it. So there's a lot of pieces that we can jump off on here, but that's just for my audience. This is not going to be new to you. But if you've heard me speaking about ancestral healing, you've heard me speaking about past lives, you've heard me speaking about being the breaker of chains. Right now, this is where it's coalescing. This bioenergetic view coalesces with this spiritual understanding that, and I'll just give one very, simple understanding here. If anyone's done hypnotherapy and gone into a past life regression or gone down your ancestral line, you can start to see a lot of these genetic things that are passed on, but then the choices that we've made to turn on the epigenetic switch on or off to either exacerbate that gene expression or to avoid it entirely, right? And this is where, we've been talking about the diet choices and the fasting and the good dairy and the fructose, all the things. These are the choices, right? These are the choices, just to make this very clear, these are the choices that we can make and feel empowered by to connect to and work with the environment that's coming into our world to express one thing or another, right? And I'll add one more piece here, maybe, and get your thoughts on this, sir. And this is spiritual, so we're at this stage now. I truly believe, right, we are a microcosm of the macrocosm, right? And this expression, this exchange, small versus big, big versus small, this is happening on every single scale that we see, right? So for example, this is happening within our bodies, right? We have each little cell that makes up a organ, and each organ makes up us as the being. But then you could keep going with that, right? We as a collective are parts of a bigger group consciousness. This earth is a part of a solar system that is a part of a bigger. So you can see how this is a trend that keeps expanding outwards. Does this resonate with you, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, it resonates in that I normally, when I'm thinking about what's going on physiologically or on an individual, I don't see a separation between that and where we are going in terms of humanity. I think that and I think you see that as far as how we progress on both an individual level, a community level, and on. I think that all of these are reflections of what is going on energetically, both physiologically and maybe other things that are directly interrelated with that too.
Have you seen, it's a question that bubbles up, my friend, with your podcast and the work that you're doing, have you seen the ripple effect of this? So I know I can speak this from my podcast, but I know yours, right? The work that you're doing and spreading this perspective and this teaching from Ray Pete and all the work that you're sort of moving into. Have you seen a ripple effect from this just in your community and your collective and people around you?
Definitely. I mean, it's part of it, of course. Maybe there's some confirmation bias, right? The kind of people who I'm talking with are all in, a lot of times, a lot of my friends and my community has become this community, right? The community of people who are looking at life and the world through these sorts of lenses. And I think there's a reason why it gravitates in that direction.
Yeah. We attract what we are, right? And that's a whole other conversation. Jay, I want to be mindful of your time, and I have one more final question for you. But before I get to that, I want to give you the opportunity now. If people have really connected into your into your energy, and they are pulled to this work, this bioenergetic view, they want to know more. Is there something you can share? I know you have your podcast. I know you're a fellow coach yourself. Where can you direct people if they want to dive deeper into all of the beautiful expressions you're sharing with the world?
Yeah. So the first place I would suggest people go, especially, we talked about this on all sorts of levels today, but if someone's looking for some great actionable steps and some foundational ideas as far as in the physical sense and nutritional sense and movement sense, what they can do to improve, increase their energy, and then translate, have that translate to better sleep and better gut health and thyroid activity and all sorts of other issues, then the first place I'd recommend people go is to jayfeldmanwellness.com/energy. And they can sign up for a free mini course, a free 7-day mini course that's geared exactly toward that, how they can increase their energy, improve their energy balance. So that's jayfeldmanwellness.com/energy. And that's my website as well. If they head over to jayfeldmanwellness.com, I've got articles. You can also find my podcast, which I appreciate that you had plugged earlier. It's called the Energy Balance Podcast. And that can be found anywhere you're listening to podcasts. And as you mentioned, we break down a lot more in the biochemistry and the physiology of some of the principles that we discussed today, especially, if someone's, I don't know, maybe was still some resistance to the idea of fructose, or including animal products or whatever it is. Those are all things we break down on our podcast.
Yeah. And you're being very modest, my friend. You do much more than that. It's not just the fructose and the animal products. It's, the fasting, it's the exercise. It's, it's very comprehensive what you've done from that part of your work. So I would push people over to listen to that show. And it is more biochemical, and you go into a lot of the science around it. But, all my listeners, you're right there with that. And you have the heart, you have the brain to go there. So definitely check it out, tune in. I will put, as always, all the details, everything that the beautiful Jay just highlighted. If you go to the show notes of this episode, you'll see all the links, you'll see all of the details where you can connect to him directly and listen to all of the things he's sharing with the world. Jay, my final question for you, and I'm going to test you here, sir, because we're going to go deep here. This is the last piece, this last sort of spiritual question I have for you. And I have been seeding it throughout this chat. I gave you the cosmic love antenna analogy, and really the reason for this show is to really help people pull back the layers, restricting our inner love, our soul, our spirit, all that we are from being shared with the world, right? And many of those layers are in the physical, like we've been talking about today. So I'm wondering, Jay, how do you define that love word? You personally, how do you define love in your world as an individual, or how you interact with others?
Oh, all right. You got to give me a second to
take your time, my friend, because I know this is the reason I asked this question is because it does take us to that deep space.
Yeah. And I know whatever I say, I'll be thinking about this a few minutes later and have something else to some other way to addend it or to adjust it. What's coming to mind now, whether or not this is my final answer, I'm just going to, this is what's coming to mind. I think love is the recognition of the lack of distinction between ourselves, between us and something or someone else. So in other words, recognizing that we are one and the same, recognizing that connection between us.
Jay, I've heard many definitions of that love word with doing this podcast, and just speaking to that beautiful mind and that heart of yours, that was just as valuable of an answer as any of them, my friend. So that was powerful. I could not agree more. And Jay, I love you very much. Thank you for spending time with me today. Thank you for sharing your beautiful mind and all of your wisdom and knowledge around the bioenergetics and this important perspective that I know has helped me very much. And I hope it's going to help people listening. Until next time. So I think we're going to have to do another chat. We can go into some other aspects of the bioenergetic view. Just people, if you weren't aware, we've only just hit the surface of all this, and there's so many more layers to go. So I'd love to have you back in the future, Jay, and we can have another conversation, go deeper into this. But until then, have a beautiful day. Enjoy your travels, all the listeners out there in the world. Have a beautiful evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Until next time here on the Cosmic Love Antenna, we love you very much and have a beautiful day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Cosmic Love Antenna podcast. We hope you enjoyed. Be sure to follow Harrison on Instagram, Twitter, and Clubhouse at Harrison Ma. That's Harrison, MEAGHER.
Electricast.